I gave you a copy? I gave you a copy. Okay. So this Sicha.
Good. This clock is 2 minutes. I'm losing 2 minutes.
Okay. This Sicha, Rebbe explains the meaning of Purim Katan, and not just Purim Katan, but what serving Hashem means in general. And let's go right to. Der Siyum von Shulchan Aruch Chaim is mit die Halachas und Dinnen von Purim Hilchos Megillah. Und in dem letzten Simen redet sich wegen den Dinnen von Yudal B'Tezvav Adarish. The conclusion of the entire first section of the Code of Jewish Law, Aruch Chaim, is the laws of Purim, and the very last chapter of this section, which talks about the laws of Purim, is about the laws of Yudalad and Tezvav Adarish, of Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan. There's Tam from Idem Pashto says, what's the reason why the Code of Jewish Law concludes with this subject? Later Seder Hashana, wie in Tur Shulchan Aruch Chaim sind isgestellt, die Hilchos von Zmani und Meid Hashana, sie heben sich an, mit Rosh Chodesh und nach Nissen, Hilchos Veis Chulu, kommen die Dinnen von Purim Vaseif. In the order of the reason why these are put at the end is because the Code of Jewish Law is arranged according to the time of the year. So it starts off with the various Yom Tovim as they come in throughout the year. So first it starts with Rosh Chodesh, and then Nissen, and then the laws of Pesach come at the end. In other words, Nissen is the first Yom Tov. The way the calendar is set up, Nissen is the beginning of the year, and the laws of Adar, which are the end of the year, are at the end of Shulchan Aruch. Und das was die Dinne von Yudal Tezvav Adarishim Kumusim Nechas Megillah. How come the laws of Purim Katan are within that section itself at the very end? Nach Dilchos Purim. Afal Pi as in there's B'Shanim Beres Gufa Zenze Kodem B'Zman Zichos Purim M'Shodesheni. Even though in the year which has two others, Purim Katan happens before regular Purim. Shushan Purim Katan happens before the regular Shushan Purim. So how come if we're going according to the chronological order of the year, it will make sense to put Purim Katan before the laws of Purim? Is there far validin and negay b'chol shana blazing the shamberes that far habnidin from Purim Kedim? Because they don't happen every year; they only happen in a leap year. So therefore, within the laws of Purim themselves, we go by what's more tadid, what's more common. Put the laws of Purim before the laws of Purim Katan, which doesn't happen every year. It happens 7 times in every 19-year cycle. Okay. Another way to approach this question: why the laws of Purim Katan precede the laws of Purim Gadol? Are after the laws of Purim Gadol, even though they happened before. As the proti dinim from Yudal Tezvav Adar, Rishon v'din Tayis v'hes behen zen amesuv from the mitzvahs of Limeshur Purim. It says, as the din mechiyum from Yudal Tezvav Adar Rishon in if from Pteim and name Minch Mizber Yancha Hashem Yintzara. Some Espetayin is nicht verbunden mit Yom Miuchat von die Mea Chesh Tzaratzam, and Ablois al Seitzov von die Mea Purim Kemitzah Purim Shabbat Hashem. The reason why we have special laws like not saying Tachim on Purim Katan is not because of Purim Katan itself. It's a result of what the laws are at Purim Gadol. In other words, the main Yontiv, it would seem, is Purim Gadol, and because Purim Gadol, the regular Purim, is a day of celebration. So as a result, there is halachas which are in the first Adar, which has a miniature form of what's happening in the second Adar. In other words, there's no intrinsic commandment of the laws of Purim Katan. Purim Katan is just a junior of Purim Gadol. So therefore, first bring the cause and then go to the effect. First talk about the main Yontiv, which is Purim, and then go to the effect of that Yontiv, which is Purim Katan. So the reason why Purim Katan is later in Shulchan Aruch is not because it happens less frequently, but rather because it's only a consequence Yontiv of the main Purim. When the Farakum dizay noch the halachas we didn't do that understand, while the dinim should be kommen aus der Tzav Musuf and Purim. And that's why they are placed in the Code of Jewish Law after the laws of Purim and Shushan Purim, because they're only a consequence of the of the days of Purim in the second Adar. So, since they are only a consequence of what happens in the second Adar, although chronologically they happen before the second Adar, they are positioned in the code of Jewish law after the laws of the second Adar, because whatever we're celebrating in the first Adar is a result of what happens in the second Adar. The main yontiv is Purim and Shushan Purim, and the offspring, so to speak, of that yontiv is that there's also going to be a celebration in the month before. That's the simple reason why this is at the very end of the code of Jewish law. However, everything in Torah is precise. If everything in the world is precise, how much more so everything in Torah must be precise? If everything in the world we say is by divine providence, and God guides every single, leaves the blows in the wind for a purpose, how much more so is everything in Torah precise? Everything in Torah must have a special intent. Is moving as das ist die Dinge von Purim stehen mit Simchas von Chilker Chaim, wenn atzman der Sim von mit die Rachs und Purim Katan, without das Vaderishin, is a nit blazer farb, was as kommt das Reisel lein Seder am Zahn von der Lachas, man kommt Mochen bis man, wo der Atzm mit Chat der Khulum, der Khmel kommt sie besef von der Chilker Chaim, nur weil dem ist ich da kavanah dik mit Kol Michalas. So it makes sense to say that the fact that the laws of Purim are at the end of the code of Jewish law, and within those laws of Purim, the very end is the laws of Purim Katan, is not only because these laws are at the end of the year, or within the laws of Purim themselves, these laws are less frequent or whatever. Rather, it makes sense to say that there's a special meaning in this being at the very conclusion of the code of Jewish law. And then with the Dinma now, then there's Sima Chesim Chilkar Chaim Briksa Chais, as in Miseder von der Chaim Shal Adam Yesus. These laws are at the very end of the code of Jewish law because they express the whole manner which a Jew is meant to serve God. And the rule is everything is judged, everything is governed by the conclusion. Like in the laws of brachas, if you started a bracha and you had in mind, let's say you're going to have a candy, and you started off the bracha of Baruch Mechelam, and then you switched and you wanted to have a piece of cake instead. Don't try this at home, folks. It's not so simple whether you could do this or not. But the consensus, I find correctly, is that if you conclude the bracha correctly, so the bracha will work. There are other opinions, and could be that I'm not saying the right conclusion, but there is many halachas which are governed by this principle. Go by the last words that were said. Go by at the end of the bracha was okay. Then it's okay.
It's a whole is throughout the month. But the first part and the second part.
Which one's
general?
So the fact that the Gemara says the words, everything goes by the conclusion, is not just a law, but the laws of brachas, but it's a long life. The conclusion, you want to know what something really is, look at the conclusion. You want to know what the code of Jewish law is about, look at the end. Look at the end of the code of Jewish law, and you'll figure out what Jewish life is about. So that's why the laws of Shulchan Aruch conclude with Purim Katan, because Purim Katan tells you what Judaism is about. So now we have to explain something about Purim Katan and why that has to do with all of Judaism. It has from the letzte Werte mit welcher der Ramot Messiah der Chilker Chaim. Maybe we could explain this by looking at the very last words that the Ramah concludes the code of Jewish law. There are those who say that you're supposed to have more feasting and joy on Purim Katan. This is not the custom. Nevertheless, you still should have a little bit more, eat a little bit more on Purim Katan. Like this would be one of the yes brownie days for Dr. Bressman, for example. Purim Katan. Why? Why should you have more? We said it's just not. We said it's not the custom to increase in our meals. So why should we? In order to fulfill the opinion of those who are more strict, you should have more of a meal today. And a good heart is always feasting. A good heart is always partying. Those are the last words in the code of Jewish law. A good heart always parties. So it says in holy books as the chsima v'nomah is meina psichon rechaim. The conclusion of the code of Jewish law is connected to the beginning of the code of Jewish law. The beginning of the code of Jewish law talks about how you should always put God in front of your eyes. When there's and the end of the code of Jewish law is a good heart always is feasting. But the tzvei moltam is connected to shveitim ksitim sheim. We just read in the last parsha about the daily sacrifice. There was one sacrifice brought in the morning, one sacrifice brought in the evening. And so corresponding to these two sacrifices, we have two commandments at the beginning of the code of Jewish law and at the end of the code of Jewish law, which are meant to permeate all of Judaism. Number one, we have the beginning of the code of Jewish law, which is how you're supposed to always picture how Hashem is looking at you and listening to you and checking your heart and mind and looking. And the end of the code of Jewish law is about rejoicing. So these two words, tamid, which means all the time, are meant to guide they have to do with who we are as Jews, as we shall see. So just like there's two sacrifices, one brought in the morning, one brought in the evening, so to the beginning of the code of Jewish law. And the code of Jewish law starts off with fear of God and joy. It starts off with fear of God, includes with joy, and uses that word in both, tamid, all the time, because as we shall see, these two principles are where things start and where things conclude. One explanation says as follows: that the Chedgar Chaim state from the mitzvahs was dinim was the Adam darf makayim and tag dekot mashkoyi. The section of the Code of Jewish law called Chaim, the way of life. This section talks about what a Jew must do daily throughout the day. From the moment you get up in the morning till the time you go to sleep at night, there is instruction from the Code of Jewish law what you need to do. And there are laws that affect the entire year, certain days of the year, certain mitzvahs. These mitzvahs, these laws, are connected with certain times throughout the day and night throughout the year. So the laws in the text of the Code of Jewish law are all classified, all designated to various times of the day and night and various times of the year. With the beginning of the Code of Jewish law, the beginning of the way of life, not just the beginning of the book of the way of life, but the beginning of a person's way of life, and the end of a person's way of life, there are two tamidim. There are two constant things that have to be there. The obligation is all the time. Throughout the time of a person's life, throughout the entire year, every single day, throughout the year, you have to have these two constant things. That's why the Shulchan Aruch begins, before it starts saying the details of what you're supposed to do at this time and this time and this day and that day, before it gets into that, it says, I want you to know something which has to be all the time. And at the end of the Code of Jewish law, it says something else, which also has to be all the time. When the far is ended, to me, is gestellt be'efen as ein tam kumt als rish v'eschol von Chaim, let's say to tam als simach chesed. And that's why it's set up in a way that there is one constant thing that is placed in the Code of Jewish law at the very beginning, and there's another constant thing which is placed at the end of the whole entire Code of Jewish law. Why? The beginning of the Code of Jewish law starts with, I place God before me at all times, always. And as the Rama explains, when a person pays attention with his heart, the great King Hashem, who the whole world is full of his glory, he is standing next to you and he looks at your deeds. When you think about this, this will immediately bring you to a feeling of fear and reverence for Hashem all the time. Actually, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that this is for higher level souls. That they, as soon as they think about it, right away full of fear. Other people, Alter Rebbe says, have to spend more time thinking about this concept in order for it to really resonate. There's ina simcha. So the beginning of the Code of Jewish law is how Hashem is watching you and listening to you, and you have reverence for Hashem. And the end of the Code of Jewish law is about joy. And these two concepts have to be in a person's life all the time. In Yadra and everything that a Jew does, every way that a Jew serves Hashem, he has to have this feeling of reverence and fear. Rabbi Yerira says not to use the word fear. Every time a Jew serves Hashem, everything he's doing, he has to have this feeling of Hashem is with him, Hashem is watching him. This feeling of reverence.
The fear talks about what it is.
Okay. Everything a Jew does has to be awesome. Awesome. And a Jew also has to have the idea of joy in the service of Hashem. As the Torah says, serve God with awe, and the Torah says, serve God with joy. Okay. Interesting note 16 that makes a distinction between these two concepts of fear and joy and the 6 constant mitzvahs. There are 6 mitzvahs that a person is supposed to do at all times. And the Rebbe says that these 2 items have to be present in everything that you do. Unlike the 6 mitzvahs, don't have to be present in everything that you do. These 2 items of joy and reverence for Hashem have to be present within each mitzvah that you're doing. According to this, we can explain why the conclusion of the code of Jewish law is with the laws of Purim. This is Yadua as far yeder sug. So far, what do we say? So far, we say the reason why this is considered to be why this is the beginning of the code of Jewish law, the end of the code of Jewish law, is because Jew has to have these 2 things at all times. Now we're going to bring this back to Purim. I think I'll tell you the next part outside. Everything that we are meant to have throughout the year is given to us through the various holidays of the year. Various holidays give us various different kinds of energy. So the power to always be happy throughout the year comes from Purim. Purim is a time when we're supposed to have the greatest joy, more than all other holidays. As it says in the Code of Jewish Law, you're supposed to rejoice until you cannot tell the difference between blesses Mordechai and Christmas Haman. So, and even greater than Sukkot, as it says elsewhere, that on other holidays, the Jewish court would send out messengers to make sure that the joy wouldn't lead to frivolity in a way that was untoward. People would act in a not good way, so they should put the joy in check. But in laws of Purim, it says the joy has to be in the greatest way. So that's a source of joy for the whole year. And this doesn't contradict to what is written elsewhere, other places in Chassidus, that says that Sukkot is a source of joy for the whole year. Why isn't a contradiction? Is Purim the source of joy for the whole year, or is Sukkot? The answer is that it is true in general that Rosh Hashanah is a source we have for the whole year for a feeling of Kabbalah Sale, for a feeling of accepting Hashem as our King. Yom Kippur is a source of tshuva for the whole year. And it does say that Simchas Torah and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres is a source of joy in our performance of mitzvahs throughout the year. And the Rambam actually puts in the concept of joy in the Rambam's book, Mishnah Torah. The Rambam says you have to always be happy in every mitzvah that you do. Where does he mention you're supposed to be happy? He mentions it in the laws of Sukkot. The reason is because the Rambam is telling us that Sukkot is a source of joy for the whole year. So why are we saying it's Purim? Isn't it Sukkot? The answer is like this. When the Beis Hamikdash stood and everything was in a perfect way, so it was enough to have just the holiday of Sukkot to be the source of simcha for the whole year. It was enough, the extra simcha in the Beis Hamikdash, that gave every Jew throughout the whole year this great simcha. But as the exile began, and there's a concealment of godliness, so the impact of the joy of Sukkot throughout the year isn't felt as much. And because in the month of Tishrei is called a mother soul energy. It's a source of energy for the rest of the year. Things are in more of a it empowers the whole year. Everything in the month of Tishrei is in a it has a general power for the rest of the year. Things are, like, so to speak, like in the brain state, and from the brain it descends to the rest of the limbs, the rest of the days of the year from the holiday, from the whole month of Tishrei. But because they are in the brain state, if you will, because they're in a higher state, then able to be closer to us in the rest of the days of the year. They're too high. It's too high to channel Simchas Torah every single day. So there has to be a closer, lower, if you will, to a regular day to be able to bring the Simcha the rest of the year. In other words, the way things are in Simchas Torah are too removed from a regular day for this to impact a regular day in a regular way. It's not in the same plane as a regular day, and therefore the Simcha, as Golos began and the concealment of Galenius began, to channel that joy throughout the year is difficult, and therefore the source of joy for the rest of the year, for all regular days of the year, actually comes channeled from Sukkot, but goes through days of Purim. Because Purim are days of the exile. They're Yom Tovim that were established during the time of the exile. And not only that, not only are they established days of the exile, Purim is a day which you're allowed to do work, like regular days of the year. The minhag is not to do work, but technically it's permissible to do work. And that's why, because it's a regular day in which you're allowed to do, actually, it's interesting, in Breslov, they have a custom not to do any work at all, not even to turn the light on Purim. Anyway, so because Purim is a...
Why?
Huh?
Why?
As them. It's like Yom Kippur. That's like Yom Kippur is there for additional work. That's their minhag. Anyway, so, but our minhag is the opposite, they're saying. That the reason for Keret, we don't want this to be a high and holy Simchas Torah kind of day. We want this day to be connected to a regular day. And therefore, it's Purim specifically is what brings the joy of Simchas Torah, and it brings it down to a Jew's regular day-to-day life, in his regular mundane week, to bring him that Simcha. And that's why there's a difference between the Code of Jewish Law and the Rambam. The Rambam, the book of the Rambam, discusses the way things are in a perfect state. The Rambam talks about the laws of Mashiach. The Rambam talks about the time of the Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam is the only book which talks about all of the laws of the Code of Jewish Law. All of the laws that apply at all times, including the time of Beis Hamikdash, including the time of Beis Mashiach. So therefore, in the Rambam Sefer, which talks about the way things are in a perfect way, the Rambam only talks about joy on the holiday of Sukkot. And then in that section, talking about the joy, the holiday of Sukkot, that's where he mentions you also have to be joyous whenever you do a mitzvah. But he mentions that in the laws of Sukkot because in a perfect world, you get the joy from Sukkot. But the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, talks about the mitzvahs which are done nowadays before the coming of Mashiach. And nowadays, how do we get simcha? We get simcha from the days of Purim. And therefore, you could. And therefore, the concept of always being happy, where does it mention the concept of always being happy? It mentioned that specifically in the laws of Purim, because in time of exile, you need Purim specifically to channel the joy throughout the year. Okay, so that explains a good part of what we wanted to explain, why the Code of Jewish Law concludes with the laws of Purim, and it concludes with the idea of joy, because joy is a critical thing, it's an essential thing in our service of Hashem. But what remains that needs to be explained still is why Purim Katan? How come miniature Purim is at the very conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law? In Purim itself, we're talking about the very end of the Code of Jewish Law. It's about miniature Purim. Why is that? So you might want to say, based upon what we just said till now, that we want to have something which is more like a mundane day, like a regular day, not a holiday, to channel the joy into a regular day. So you might want to say, based on that what's closer to a regular day is not Purim Gadol, not the regular Purim, but miniature Purim. Because a regular Purim, there's so many mitzvahs of the day. You have to read the Megillah, you have to have the Suda, you have to give them Tasav Yenim, Shalach Manis, and a big chunk of the day, you're busy doing all these mitzvahs. But on Purim Katan, miniature Purim, there are no special mitzvahs today. So therefore, there's more of a connection to a regular day, and automatically has more of an impact on the simcha, and therefore this specifically is the channel of simcha for the whole year, precisely because it doesn't have all of those mitzvahs. But we can't answer that. Why? Number one, this would go well according to the opinions which say that you have to have simcha. But according to what the Ramah writes, that's not the custom to have simcha. So how is it supposed to be the source of joy for the whole year when there's not even an obligation to be happy? Number two, we don't have a Purim Katan every year. So why is this the conclusion, the code of Jewish law, which is supposed to give it, we're saying it's a conclusion because it has a central theme for the entire year, but it doesn't even happen every year, Purim Katan. So how does it have this, we cannot say that the source of joy for the whole year is from miniature Purim, because number one, some say it's not even an obligation to have a simcha this time. Number two, it doesn't even happen every year. So there must be another reason why this is a conclusion of the whole code of Jewish law, not because it is more connected to the rest of the year and it's more able to channel the joy because of its mundaneness, if you will. So we have to say something else. So let's first analyze something else. Why is it that the Ramah, when he talks about these two principles of joy and fear, joy and reverence, he puts the concept of joy at the very conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law, and the concept of reverence at the beginning. In other words, we said that they're both central, but why is it one is at the beginning and one is at the end? We said the reason why reverence is at the beginning because it's fundamental. So the similar concept is regarding joy as well. Simcha is also fundamental. Joy is fundamental as well. He says you have to have simcha even before you say brachas in the morning. You already have to have simcha. It says you can't begin saying brachas till you have simcha. So if joy is so fundamental, it should have been also at the beginning or before. Why is it at the end? The answer is like this. These two constant things, at the beginning of the Code of Jewish Law, at the end of the Code of Jewish Law, the Ramah wants to tell us he doesn't mean to tell us about how reverence and joy are part of serving God, but rather he wants to tell us how reverence precedes the service of God and how joy is the conclusion of the service of God. He's not telling us how reverence and joy, Yonatan, the water's fine, come inside. He's not telling us how reverence and joy are part of the service of Hashem. He's telling us how reverence precedes the service of Hashem, and joy is at the conclusion, after the fulfillment of the Code of Jewish Law. Before a Jew starts his day, starts serving Hashem, the very first thing is to accept upon yourself Hashem as your king. That's the very first thing. This acceptance is present, and you're conscious of this before you begin serving Hashem. Once you already begin serving Hashem, you put on your tefillin, you put on your talis, you open your siddur. So it's not anymore only about you accepting Hashem as your king. You're already in the middle of the service. You're accepting not Hashem as your king, you're accepting a certain mitzvah. When you put on tefillin, you're focusing on the mitzvah of tefillin. The idea of Hashem being your king, that connection, that precedes the service of Hashem. That's not present in the various components of your day, various components of the various things you're doing for Hashem. That precedes this. And at the conclusion of your service of Hashem, after you have finished your service of Hashem, then you get the reward of the joy that you have, that you've achieved through your mitzvahs, through the things you've done to serve Hashem. The connection that you've achieved through the mitzvahs brings you to the simcha. So the accepting Hashem as your king precedes the service of Hashem. And joy, pure joy, although it's supposed to be present when we serve Hashem as well, but you only have the full energy of the joy after the conclusion. Why? Because while you're serving Hashem, while you're putting on the tefillin, you're saying that you're opening your siddur, there's something of the siddur that you're focusing on. Something of the tefillin that you're focusing on. Something of the stuff that you're doing, you're focusing on. It's not, there is a feeling of reverence for Hashem and getting what the job done. There's a feeling of responsibility. of you have to get this done. So only after you have finished the job, then can you have the full power of the joy. It's kind of like the way Hashem set up the year in the month of Tishrei. First, you have acceptance of Hashem, Rosh Hashanah. Then there is a tshuva of Yom Kippur, and there is a feeling of reverence. And when you have the simcha at the conclusion of the holiday season, at the end of the holiday season, the very, very end, that's when there's a full, infinite joy of Simchas Torah. So too, at the conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law, he tells you that there is a simcha after you serve Hashem. There's a simcha which precedes the service of Hashem, and then there is, as the Hasidic masters like to give the following parable. They say when a Jew is about to go into a very hot mikveh, standing at the entrance of the mikveh, so it's too hot to get into the mikveh, but you put your toe in. Oh, it's too hot. It's too hot. And then you're used to it. It's good. As opposed to before you do an Avera, it's Kishmak, the Avera sounds so good. And then we get into the Avera, what am I doing to myself?
Oh, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. Going to a Tan Mikvah is going into the service of Hashem. So you start off with, I got to do this. I got to, in the language of the 80s, I got to make the donuts. You know what I'm talking about? Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Whatever. Anyways, so groggy-eyed guy gets up in the morning, time to make donuts. So the first step is this idea. It has to be simcha all the time, but there is a feeling of obedience, of responsibility that precedes the service of Hashem. That's in the which also affects. It doesn't allow there to be just the full expression of simcha because a lot of things that have to get done. After you conclude your service of Hashem, then there could be the full simcha. So that's the difference between the way the Rambam describes the joy and the way the Ramah describes joy. The Rambam is talking about the joy that you have in doing mitzvahs. And the joy you have in doing mitzvahs comes from the extra joy that the Jewish people had in the Beis HaMikdash on Sukkot. In Shulchan Aruch, however, he's not talking about the joy of a mitzvah per se. He's talking about the joy of a Jew being connected to Hashem as a Jew is always connected to Hashem, which is felt, which is revealed when you finish your service of Hashem. And therefore, this simcha is especially related to miniature Purim. The days of joy of the whole year have a lot of mitzvahs and customs and laws which are connected to that day. So the feeling of simcha is influenced from other things that are happening that day. You're happy on Purim because you're having a Suda as well. You're happy on Purim because you're doing Shalach Manas. Even the simcha of Ad Lo Yada, simcha beyond all limitation, it's not something which happens throughout the day. It's something which is connected to that part of the holiday of Purim. But then there are other mitzvahs that have to be done that day. And other mitzvahs which require you not to be Ad Lo Yada, to be beyond logic and reason. Other mitzvahs which require you to focus. But miniature Purim, which does not have any mitzvahs, the only thing that this day has is joy. So it comes out that the simcha of miniature Purim has nothing else mixed into it. All it has is pure joy. Other days of joy are connected to a mitzvah as well. It's not pure joy. So now we can explain the conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law that Ramah says that it's good to always, a good heart is always rejoicing. The Taz brings down the Tashbates, who says that you should just have a little. The Ramah says you should have a little bit more joy, a little bit more feasting. But the Tashbate says you should have a lot. Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris, he said you should invite people, should celebrate. As the Mishnah says, there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar. In tremendous joy, that's what's supposed to happen in the first Purim as well. So the Taz is saying that although the Ramah says you should have a little bit of joy, a little bit of feasting, to fulfill the obligation of the others who are of that opinion, though that's the words of the Ramah hints at the end of the Code of Jewish Law by saying the words, a good heart is always rejoicing. By adding those words, the Taz says the Ramah is hinting to the fact that you shouldn't be satisfied with just having a little bit of joy. Rather, you should have an abundance of joy and not just a little bit. That's what the Ramah is hinting to by concluding those words. So he's not just saying to have a little bit. He said those are explicit words, but he ends the code of Jewish law, says the Taz, with the words, a good heart is always rejoicing, he's hinting that we should follow the other opinions. Now the question is, as Blake is thinking, why did he say so? This is the code of Jewish law. He should have said so. Why doesn't he not? Why doesn't he hint to this? Why doesn't he say it straight up? That wasn't what you're wondering. But that's Rebbe's question. Why does the Taz say that Ramah is hinting to this? Why doesn't he say so explicitly? And the answer is like this. We find in general that there are various kinds of joy which are associated with various levels of obligation. During the holiday of Sukkot, the Torah says there's a biblical commandment to be joyous. And then there is the joy of Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, and then there is the joy of Simchas Torah, which is only a custom. It's only a custom to be joyous in Simchas Torah. So the joy of Simchas Torah, which is only a custom, yet that's the greatest joy. When there is no obligation, the biblical obligation is a greater joy. Why is there a greater joy? Because when there's a command of Hashem to be joyous, the joy is not coming from the Jew himself, it's coming from Hashem's commandment. Hashem is giving us a joy that he expects from every human being. This is the joy you're able to do. This is joy you're commanded to do. But the Talmud says that Hashem says, it's more precious to me, the laws of the rabbis and the laws of the Torah. Why is it more precious? Because the laws of the rabbis, when a Jew is stringent upon himself beyond what Hashem has explicitly told him to do, that indicates that a Jew cares about God's mitzvahs, and it comes from within the Jew, not because Hashem told him to. So therefore, there's a greater joy, not when Hashem commands us to have joy, but when we celebrate the joy by ourselves out of Hashem's commandment. And therefore, the greatest joy is specifically on Simchas Torah. Even greater than the joy of Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, where it says at that time there were various levels of Jews who celebrate different levels of joy. But Simchas Torah, because it comes from within the Jew himself, that's why it has this extra measure of joy.
Simchas Torah.
Hold on. Okay, very good. So Simchas Torah, it says in Code of Jewish law that it's a custom to have joy. In the Purim Katan, in miniature Purim, doesn't say there's a custom to have joy. The Ramah only hints to it.
It's even more.
It's even more. When it says that the Ramah only says it as a story. There are those who increase in joy, as if it doesn't. If he said that this was the custom, you would have to do it. That's the custom. He doesn't say it's a custom because it's something which is it's beyond a regular custom. It's not even mentioned. It's something that the Ramah really alludes to. Because the simcha of the miniature Purim is similar to the simcha that a Jew has after finishing finishing the service of Hashem. Again, when you're involved in the service of Hashem, your simcha is somewhat colored by your involvement in the service of Hashem and what you're involved with. Then there is a pure simcha after you finish the simcha of the connection you have with Hashem. And Purim Katan, the Ramah writes what happens at the end of the service of Hashem, after the service of Hashem. The after party, in a way, is greater than the party itself. The Purim Katan holiday emphasizes the simcha that follows the service of Hashem. Okay,
this is something you arouse. It's kind of like you do it though. You have to. It's not a reward that just comes on its own. You're arousing it
as a result of your mitzvah. But on Purim Katan, there's not all it is joy. Purim Katan is just joy. There's no mitzvahs to be happy with. It's just the simcha itself.
This is like the party that the Ashtaros has at the end of this conclusion.
With the people of Shushan.
Right.
Interesting. So the Rebbe concludes like this. He says, this simcha of Purim Katan specifically, the Magen Avram in the Code of Jewish law says, this will bring us to the time when God will fill our mouths with laughter. Specifically, the Simcha Purim Katan. Why does that have to do with the coming of Mashiach? Because through the Simcha that we have at the end of in the time of Golus, in the way of Tev Lev Misha Tamid, this will bring us to the everlasting Simcha B'Yas Mashiach. It's so in conclusion, what are we saying? We're saying that the reason why this quote concludes the laws of Purim Katan is because it's underscoring the Simcha that you have after serving Hashem. The connection that you have with Hashem, not why you're involved in this specific thing. It's not the pure joy. There's something that you're involved with that you're focused on. It somehow limits and takes away from the pure expression of joy. Then there is the actual joy you have in just being connected to Hashem as a result of the mitzvah you're doing. And that's what's underscored by the holiday of Purim Katan, where there are no specific mitzvahs that are done. And therefore it is what encapsulates the simcha that a Jew has as a result of the service of Hashem. Where you get to in the analogy before, the in the mikveh, not the and therefore the Ramah doesn't tell us about the simcha in a way that he obligates you, just hints to it, emphasizing that this is the infinite joy of a Jew and Hashem, even greater in the way that's interesting.